Well, according to Elon Musk, the people have spoken and they want a third party in the United States, or maybe we should say they want a third party that can actually compete in election cycles in the United States. And so Elon Musk is delivering with the America Party, right? So what is the America Party? What is it going after? What does it stand for? What's its platform? And does it have a chance? Now, we're going to talk about some of the other third parties that have popped up within American political history. And one thing I think we need to say right up front is if you're just automatically counting out Elon Musk, that's probably not a good idea, right? He does have a number of resources in order to actually pull something like this off. And he has a pretty good track record in all the other endeavors that he's engaged upon. But politics is a unique and very, very different realm than what he's used to engaging with. And so today, what we're going to try to do is analyze what exactly the America Party will stand for. And based off of kind of what we know, our experience, the history, does it have a chance of actually succeeding? All of this and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument, brought to you by Ground News. And we're going to get to some of the resources that we use from Ground News just a little bit later in this episode. I'm your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the audience, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, we have our resident historian, political prognosticator, the Oracle of Virginia, Christian Hines. How are you doing, Christian?
I'm doing well.
Well, this is going to be an interesting one. And in fact, we're going to start right off by jumping to Ground News. And the nice thing is that you can just go right over to Ground News and you can type in the new America Party. And just like that, it pops right up and you're going to find out that there is a plethora. That means a lot. There's a plethora of articles from left, right, and center on this new development. And remember, Ground News is not only giving you access to all this information, but it's actually telling you where it's coming from. So you get to know not just what they're writing about, but who's writing about it and for what reasons. Now, remember, Ground News is both a website and an app that curates all the latest stories and provides you with the necessary insight you need in order to make good decisions about what's going on in the world. If you want something that's going to actually provide you not only with access to news, but greater transparency over who's giving you the news. And right now, if you go over to ground.news/MTA, you can get 40% off their Vantage plan. That's right. For just $5 a month, you can check out all of their many features and get unlimited access at ground.news/MTA. So if, like us, you're a little bit frustrated with how the big boy search engines curate the news, Ground News is an excellent option. We use it regularly around here, and we have loved the results. Once again, ground.news/MTA. Go check out that Vantage plan. All right, I'm going to bring up that the first little article that I found that I thought was interesting. Actually came from all places, The Signal in Santa Clarita Valley, and it was Musk announces new American Party, 4 things to know. I jumped down to this part right here that I thought was interesting, and that's Musk's plan. So the Tesla CEO wrote on X that the American people would go after several seats, the American Party, would go after several seats in Congress with the goal of keeping either Democrats or Republicans from gaining a majority in Congress. One way to execute on this would be to laser focus on just 2 or 3 Senate seats and 8 to 10 House districts, given the razor-thin legislative margins that would be enough to serve as the deciding vote on contentious laws, ensuring that they serve the true will of the people. Elon also stated, the way we're going to crack the uniparty system is by using a variant of how Epaminondas shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility at Leuctra, extremely concentrated force at a precise location on the battlefield. So right off the bat, what we see is that Elon Musk is at least understanding that he's not going to set up this new America Party and just overnight become the dominant majority, right? He's not suggesting that, Elon Musk is going to be the next president and the America Party is going to be controlling Congress. He's taking what we might call a much more limited strategic approach to trying to figure this out. And so right off the bat, let's take serious that Elon Musk has a vision. He has a strategy. He definitely has resources. But let's first talk about why is he doing this in the first place? Like, what is the point? Because we can talk all day long about, the uniparty system. We have a 2-party. Okay, fine. But 5 minutes ago, Elon Musk was a part, a temporary employee, but a part of the Trump administration doing DOGE, and we had some blowups. So Christian, let's bring up some more articles here on kind of this breakdown that we've seen between Trump and Elon Musk. And remember that part of this break, because everyone right now looks at it was with DOGE and the big beautiful bill and the spending, and that certainly was like the major departure point, right? That was where the break became very, very pronounced. But there was some difficulties with Elon Musk and MAGA long before that break ever took place. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a lot of this has been kind of boiling underneath the surface for quite some time. When I built the outline for this podcast, I identified really 3 to 4 areas of rupture that kind of led to this point. And in some ways, the early signs of this go all the way back to December.
Yeah.
And this was over immigration. So for those who were active on X at the time, in December, there was this big blow up involving Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy over immigration, particularly over things like H-1B visas, but also skills-based immigration in general. So a lot of people remember that one of the primary things that drove Donald Trump back into the White House was Biden's immigration crisis on the southern border. And I mean, we had anywhere from like 10 to 20 million illegals come in a span of just 4 years. And Trump ran on mass deportations. Well, immediately after he wins, there was this element of the right that was like, great, maybe we'll deport, the MS-13 members, but... And so there was this big argument over, who gets to come into America? What does it mean to be an American? A lot of these like kind of existential deep questions. And there was this brief exchange that I want to just go through that took place on Christmas Day that I think encapsulates the divide that existed on the right on this issue. And it starts like this. There's this one account that brings up that Silicon Valley's biggest limitation is engineering talent shortage. It's talking about a semiconductor industry needing 160,000 engineers by 2030, driving
2032.
2032, driving $250 billion worth of new investments. And Elon called this this talent war the craziest thing ever. And so basically he's, this account's talking about this issue related to a skills shortage. And so then it continues a little bit. And Elon says, no, we need to double that number. The number of people who are super talented engineers and super motivated in the U.S. is far too low. And then he says, this is where you start getting the rupture. And he says, think of it like a sports team. If you want your team to win, then you need to recruit top talent wherever they may be. That enables the whole team to win. Well, a lot of people did not like the idea of equating the United States to a sports team. There's an element of the right that views the United States as more than just a sports team, where you get to pick and choose who is on the team and who gets cut from. And then another person says, we'll open a school, we have brains. And then Elon says this, if you need a school, you've already lost. So what is not shown and what I won't go through is the replies to this tweet, because they were not happy. Let's put it like that. And the reason I go through this whole thing is because this encapsulates a much larger debate that has really emerged on the right over the last 6 months, at least, arguably a little bit longer than that. You could maybe argue that it goes back decades ago, back when conservatives 20 years ago were complaining about how there's this element of the right, usually driven by like Chamber of Commerce types, that they actually want open borders and mass migration and even illegal immigration because it's great for business, and Democrats obviously want it because they think that they get a political benefit out of it. And so this divide over immigration, I think, is really blown up, particularly since Trump's election, because, as we've seen, there's this element that is trying to get Trump's ear to, pull him back from mass deportations. And some people have looked at Elon's position on this and say, you're getting this all wrong. The United States is not a sports team. It's not about picking and choosing who to come in and win with. We're an extended family. There's something that's intrinsic about being an American. And look, there's an element of the right that will then go and say, and therefore nobody should ever come in ever, period, the end. But then there is another element of the right that says that doesn't mean that we can't let people in. That means that we need to be very careful about who we let in at very limited numbers.
Let's put it this way. Let's do the caricature, right? The caricature of the right on this is just xenophobia and not wanting anyone to immigrate. The caricature of Elon Musk's side on this is you don't care about the country. You just want to get whatever's going to get you the biggest profit with your company. the nuanced position, which everyone now hates, the nuanced position is that America is not, it's true, America is not just a sports team. This is not just an economic competition. That there's other components here. And by the way, those other components impact your economics, because if you want a highly productive society, you generally need a high trust society. And high trust societies are created when people generally have a basic, a shared foundational worldview, right? That doesn't mean they got to agree on everything, but they generally agree about the certain things which make society work in their environment, and that leads to high trust. It's what leads to an environment where we can trust each other to do our jobs, not because we're going to get fired or not because we're going to get arrested or not because, but because it's the right thing to do, right? There's a cultural component there that's important. That's fair. There's also this understanding. It's like, okay, but if certain jobs need to be done and they can't currently be done, well, then what's going to end up happening is either the product that you want to buy won't work right, or it will be more expensive and you will go elsewhere. And so now I can't effectively run my company. And so the nuanced position is more of saying, okay, Elon, we understand the point that you're making. We need to do a better job of fixing it internally, because the external approach to dealing with this has led to an influx of people that are not at all concerned about, the United States. They're not all concerned about being Americans. They're simply here to collect either a paycheck or benefits or whatever else it is. So how do we mitigate the impacts that it's going to potentially have on a company or on an endeavor that we want to dominate in America, while at the same time recognizing that we're not just the United States is not an extension of your board of directors, right? We are a country, and we have certain things that we're trying to protect that go beyond just your company. And that's a fair discussion. That's one where you would hope that reasonable people can come together and discuss. The reason why I think a lot of people were skeptical of Elon Musk when he started doing this was like, no, wait a second. 5 minutes ago, you were on the other side of a lot of these debates. Right? You're new here. We don't mean as an immigrant. We mean you're new here with respect to what America First means, what, Make America Great Again means, what conservatism means. You're new to this process. And you don't get to upset a major component of that process and lecture the rest of us that we just don't get it. You may be right that we don't get it from the perspective of your particular company. But the reason why you've come over this way is because you were allowing people on the left to run the whole country in a way that was pretty detrimental. And look, we are glad that once they started attacking freedom of speech, you understood that this is a real problem, and then you modified the way you thought about politics. Okay, but again, new converts don't get to show up and run the show. We're not saying you can't have a say. We're not saying you can't share your perspective. You do not get to talk down and condescend to the rest of us. And that was a big problem, I think, with Elon's approach. I actually think Vivek tried to be a little bit more, and this is, typical of Vivek, right? He's actually a pretty good communicator. And I think he tried to express it from a different position. But
He's
at that
a little
point,
more diplomatic.
Yes, but at that point, it didn't matter, right? At that point, it was you're an arrogant, condescending tech bro that now wants to run the show when you weren't contributing anything to this fight 5 years ago. In fact, you were on the other side contributing to the other side.
Yeah. But in all fairness, Elon is right when it comes to, we would not have won without Elon. I absolutely
his
believe that.
His contribution was very important.
It wasn't just his contribution to the campaign trail, though.
That's not what I mean. I mean, the overall nature of his contribution through buying X, through allowing for a free platform.
I think buying X and having actual free speech on X, to where people aren't getting deplatformed, throttled, or anything else for exposing the truth and putting information out there.
Yeah, but we're not minimizing that. We're talking about this particular, again, in the nature of what's the split between Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
Okay.
This isn't part of the split.
Right.
And we've got more to go through on that point.
But I'm not denigrating his contribution.
Okay. You were in the process of saying you don't get to show up here and run the show. But he is correct in that if he had not shown up here, we would have lost this show. We would have lost all of it. And so there is an element of deference he gets because we won because of him. in large part. I do not think we would have won if he wouldn't have purchased X.
I will say that I agree with you that his contribution was significantly more important than my own, even though I think I've been on the right side of this debate a lot longer than Elon Musk. But you're absolutely right that what he did was, again, he obviously doesn't get all the credit, but he should get a significant amount of credit. That it's very difficult to see how we win without there being a platform that we could freely converse on.
Yeah, I mean, if we were dependent on legacy media still, we would have been screwed.
Yeah.
So on the next point, and this is something that's a little bit more, I would argue, somewhat more favorable to Elon, because it's not just immigration that drove the split. That's a secondary issue, but I'm trying to cover all the ground here. The next one is much more significant, and I think this is what actually drove the blow up when it happened, and it's the debt situation. It's the fiscal situation. So here's a tweet from Elon where he brings up that if this continues, America goes de facto bankrupt and all tax revenue will be going to paying interest on the national debt with nothing left to pay for anything else. And for the audio listeners, this is just a chart that shows the U.S. national debt over time. And I mean, it's turning into an exponential curve upwards. Yeah. Right. And on that front, one of the things that Elon tried to do immediately after Trump won was he spearheaded a lot of DOGE's initiatives. Well, the jury's still out, but it is looking like DOGE is not going to be able to get even close to offsetting the federal deficit. So the current DOGE tracker shows 190 billion cut. Well, that's less than 3% of the federal budget.
Yeah.
And they've already cut, USAID, all of it. They shut it down outright, right? They cut all the trans operas going to Colombia, all the crazy nonsense stuff that both Trump and Elon were in agreement on was like, this should not be done. But you get to a point where you start rapidly running out of areas to cut. In fact, a huge...
Well, wait, let's...
I don't think he ran out of areas to cut. Can I just say one thing about this is I think Elon looked at this massive bloated budget and was like, we can totally cut all of this. I think what he did not anticipate is the amount of pushback from the judiciary on a lot of this, as well as public opinion. I think the left is really good at spinning some of this spending and being like, people are going to die if we get rid of some of this stuff from USAID or we get rid of some of this other stuff. I don't think he anticipated how people's viewpoint and public opinion would turn on a dime, because people are fickle and they're all about cuts when it's everybody else's cuts. But the minute the cuts start impeding on things they're doing, well, now you cross the line. I mean, I was talking to a gal at the polls literally just in June, and she was like, well, I was all about all these cuts until he started wanting to cut some of these archives and some of these funding for this and that at the archives. And I'm just going, it's always that. It's always that. It's always make all these cuts, but don't you dare touch my little pet projects. Don't you dare touch this subsidy that I like or this funding that I like. There must be stuff for other people you could cut. Well, and I don't think Elon was quite expecting how many people were so on the government tit that they needed to throw a massive fit the minute that their funding might get touched.
We're gonna talk more about that, because this factors into why he's actually setting up this third party. But the whole idea of, again, I think Elon Musk is used to operating like an executive, and he's used to operating an executive in companies for which he has a great deal of authority on spending decisions. And so his idea is he's a businessman, Trump's a businessman. They're going into this environment. They're going to identify all of this waste and they're going to cut it. Of course, right? Of course. And then you realize, oh, no, you don't have the authority through the executive branch to just arbitrarily cut all of this. Now you've got to convince Congress. And now you have to convince, and to Tina's point, you're looking at it, goes, well, this is wasteful spending. Every single piece of, quote, wasteful spending is not wasteful to the person that's getting the money. And when you start talking about a particular piece of spending that is either impacting a congressional district significantly, or you talk about a particular piece of spending which is much harder to get rid of from the perspective of fraud, waste, abuse, because as we've talked about before, roughly 70% of the federal budget it's non-discretionary. It's already spent. Like, I think it's 70% of the federal budget is Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and interest on the debt. Right?
If you want, I can do the numbers live right now.
Yeah.
This is the U.S. debt clock, and here's the ultimate problem that Elon is running into. This number right here, 37 trillion, we just crossed it recently, is the total U.S. federal debt. This number, 5.1 trillion, is federal tax revenues. This number is federal spending.
Yeah.
That's 7.1 million.
So $2 trillion deficit.
Where is $2 trillion? We're in the hole. $2 trillion a year.
Well, and this is so my
but
point.
it's more dangerous than that. And this is to Elon's point, because okay, so where are we spending $7.1 trillion, right? Is it all going to trans operas in Colombia? Can we just eliminate that? No, it actually turns out that the biggest drivers in debt, and this is where Democrats are incredibly disingenuous, is not going to wars, it's not going to corporations, it's not going to tax cuts for billionaires. It's going to stuff they want.
Yes.
But it's also going to stuff that the American people want, which is entitlement programs and transfer programs and welfare programs. So the largest contributor to the debt, Congress has no control over, because Congress wrote it off when they declared it to be mandatory spending, and that is Medicare and Medicaid. It's 1.6, almost $1.7 trillion is going to Medicare and Medicaid per year. The next largest contributor to the federal budget is Social Security. Who wants to cut Social Security? That's 1.5 trillion a year.
Mm-hmm.
The next largest is the Department of Defense, and that's 900 billion a year. Well, actually, used to be the third largest. I kind of got ahead of myself.
You did.
The third largest is actually interest on the national debt, which is $1 trillion a year.
I cannot believe that our defense budget, arguably the only main legit function of the federal government, is number 4 on the list of expenditures.
Well,
and you know what? That's mandatory spending. The Department of Defense is not, that's discretionary spending. The Department of Defense is not mandatory spending. So what's mandatory spending are entitlement they're basically entitlement programs and the interest on the debt, where Congress they don't get an option on that.
So when you combine, in a case in point situation here is you said the word Social Security and entitlement program, and here's the thing. Everybody, left, right, center, is like, don't you dare touch my Social Security.
And this is Elon's point.
And the thing is that the left looted it a long time ago. Money's just coming from one paycheck to the other paycheck at this point.
But what that means is, it just means that there is no money in the Social Security fund, which is to say there is no savings that is going out to pay beneficiaries. Savings. It's money comes in and immediately goes out to current beneficiaries.
More money's going out than coming in, which is why the Social Security Trust Fund will be gone by the mid-2030s.
But the point is that you can talk all day long about subsidies and other and entitlement spending and everything, but there are certain ones that are the sacred cow. And Social Security is a sacred cow.
Well, it's a sacred,
even like Medicare, sacred cow.
It's a sacred cow in part because it's something that Americans directly pay into, and that most Americans at some point in their life pull out from, Social Security specifically. But the reason why we bring this up is because it's important to understand that Elon Musk going into this with the mindset of we got to cut all this spending, and then coming to the realization that, again, you're taking in $5.1 trillion a year in revenue. But on Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and interest on the national debt alone, you're paying out over $4 trillion.
That's 60% of all federal spending right there.
And again, if you're just looking at what we actually pull in, it's more than that, right? Then you talk about the deficits, the debt spending that we're doing on top. So, okay, what that means is that even the $190 billion that he found that didn't touch anything with this other stuff, they couldn't even get that codified in the big beautiful bill. Now there was other spending cuts that were associated with things that you're watching the left do this right now. Like, oh my gosh, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people are going to be thrown off of Medicaid. Well, okay, what did they do to Medicaid? Well, they did things like work requirements. So it's like you got to at least be seeking out work or working part-time because, again, this was supposed to be for people that, desperately needed it, right? If you're here illegally, you're not getting access, right? All these other things. But the point of it is the big beautiful bill broke something between Elon and Trump because Elon looked at this and he recognized the debt as the existential threat that it is. And we've talked a lot about the fact that he's not wrong. Now, on Trump's side of this, who's voting for politicians that cut Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, like in substantive ways? Who, like this is a very real thing where this goes into questions about if the politicians you elect are not willing to cut in to these major spending issues, then you're not going to be able to tackle the deficit. And so that's part of Elon's thing to start a third party, right? We'll get to that in a second. That's part of Elon's thing to start a third party is the idea that, well, these politicians are not willing to actually do the hard things that need to be done to get spending under control. The other thing that happened with this that we need to acknowledge here is a lot of ego involved. So we have some things that we can look at that are legitimate concerns, right? Where Elon's bringing up important points, and there's been this fracturing between elements of MAGA and Elon Musk over some of these issues. But there's also this didn't go into, well, we're friends that have a friendly disagreement about the strategy or the process or the timeline with respect to relieving debts. No, this went straight into the typical Elon's off the rails and he might be on drugs and Trump's on the Epstein list and that's why it's never going to come out. They went for the jugular pretty quick from the public's perception on the sort of like personal insults that make it hard to come back from. And you started to see this element, like Elon did this tweet like a few days after the fact where he said, I've said some things that maybe I shouldn't have, and the whole deal. But it once again, it kind of spiraled again. And I would say that there was another thing that you kind of saw took place that was tangential but relevant, and that was the whole thing with the strike on Iran. You saw this other fraction. So you have this fraction between MAGA and Elon Musk that took place over immigration. You have this fraction between Trump and Elon Musk that took place over the big, beautiful bill. And then you had a fraction of elements of MAGA and Trump with respect to the strikes in Iran. And I would argue that you're seeing a component of that now too with the Epstein files. Because there's a lot of people looking at this going, no, absolutely. This FBI memo is garbage. This idea that, this isn't going to be pursued, that has also caused a bit of a break. So you have to understand this from the perspective of those three fractures that are taking place. Trump and MAGA, Trump and Elon, and Elon and MAGA. Right? So all of that is kind of swirling around to where there's a lot of confusion here. And now Elon is pushing out with this idea of a third party, and they've got some ideas on what exactly that third party is going to look like. There's still a whole lot of questions on, what is going to be the platform around it. And so what we're going to do now that we've kind of laid the groundwork for why is this even happening, we're going to go into the whole idea of, can this really work? Like what is Elon pitching this off of, right? And can it really work? But before we get to that, I want to talk about one of our other sponsors of this show, and that is Live Action. I'm telling you right now, Live Action is one of, if you want to talk about a pro-life organization that has done excellent work, both on the political side, but also on the cultural side, it is Live Action. I had the honor of speaking at their first Young Leadership Conference that they ever did, which was last year, had 750 students here. They decided to do it again this year, had over 1,500. Not to mention the fact that if you look at some of the work that they've done, the videos they've done, some of it will just break your heart. Talking to people who were former abortion doctors, to people who had actually survived abortions, it will break your heart, but it will open your eyes to what is actually going on within this industry. They have been key in leading the fight to defund Planned Parenthood. And if these are issues that actually mean something to you like they do to us, I'd highly encourage you to go over to the Live Action website right now. If you want to join the movement with a monthly gift of $20.25, 2025, right? As a thank you, you'll receive a free Live Action mug. You know how I feel about my coffee mugs, right? Free Live Action mug. You can text Nick to 70723. Text Nick to 70723 to learn more about the work they're doing. This has been an organization we've worked with for years now. I absolutely love the cultural engagement they do is some of the best you will see. Some of it is very deep. Some of it is very heartbreaking. Some of it is a little bit more lighthearted and funny. They actually did one video that I thought was absolutely hysterical when Roe was overturned, talking about, gosh, what does this actually mean? Oh, it means you got to take personal responsibility for your own decisions, right? But they did it in a way that was funny, very accessible, and very shareable. And let's face it, if we want to create this sort of environment where people are not even thinking about abortion, we want it to be illegal, but we also want to not even consider it. The cultural fight is very, very important. Live Action is a great job. Go over there and check them out. Once again, text Nick, N-I-C-K, to 70723. Okay, let's talk about, can a third party really work? And I think first, let's discuss a little bit about, like, what are they even, you can run a third party off of frustration over the other two parties. That's easy. Right? Everyone has frustration over the two existing parties. I don't know of anybody that's sitting around and going right now going, nope, I think my party's just done a bang up job and there's been absolutely no problems whatsoever. No, people are frustrated. But what are they actually talking about building this party around? So we went over to Elon Musk's X page, and he retweeted this from Tesla owners of Silicon Valley. And by the way, somebody else said, like, this is not the first group that has done this list that Elon's retweeted. He goes, the America's Party will be focused on 1, reduce debt, responsible spending only. 2, modernize military with AI and robotics. 3, pro-tech, accelerate to win in AI. 4, less regulation across the board, but especially in energy. 5, free speech. 6, pro-natalist. And then 7, centrist policies everywhere else. Are you down for this? Right. So that's their.
This is weird. So number 1 being reduce the debt, responsible spending only. Can I tell you what the problem is with that? The problem is that nobody agrees on what spending is responsible and what spending is not responsible. So where is the line? You have to draw the line somewhere. Yeah. You have to lay out what spending is responsible versus not.
So let's. I want to go into a couple. Can we look at a couple of these real quick and just separate them out? Right. So first of all, I'm going to tell you right this, Elon, you are an incredibly smart guy, and I'm not trying to be condescending or anything else. I'm not. Modernize military with AI robotics. 0 people are going to the polls for that, except maybe Lockheed Martin. Right? Pro-tech, accelerate to win in AI. 0 people are going to the polls for I'm sorry, obviously you're going to find some people that are very interested in this, but as far as, is this the thing that wakes them up to run to the polls? Is this the thing that causes them to donate their time, their money, to knock doors for candidate? No, I'm sorry, it doesn't. Pro-natalist. What do you mean by that? Do you mean pro-life? I mean, I'm assuming what you mean is pro-population growth, because you understand in a way that a lot of other people don't that population collapse is a real problem. But what do you mean by being pro-natalist? Are you going to be pro-life?
Well, some of it is so being innate and being natalist is focused on reproduction and fertility, right? The problem is we don't have a fertility problem. We have a birth control and abortion problem. That's not fertility. It's not the same thing. You're fertile. You're just killing them.
We do have a fertility problem.
We do have a fertility problem too.
Okay. When a massive majority of women are on birth control, you don't know whether we have a fertility problem or not. We have a birth control problem.
Look, I am not disagreeing with you about the problems with abortion and birth control. There is a fertility problem. This is not up for debate. When we actually look at sperm count amongst young men and testosterone count, it has plummeted. Now, it could be that some of that is tied to some of the things associated with birth control and other things, but there's no question that has been decreasing over time. There's also
And the birth rate is below replacement.
Yeah, well, but birth rate is not
understand. I understand,
not
but
necessarily
I
a fertility
actually-
issue. That can be
Okay,
other things.
so we disagree in this area because it really, if more women were not ever on the birth control, we would not be having a problem with fertility rates in this country.
I think there's other issues that we can talk about that have to do with the sort of chemicals people are using, the sort of thing that are impacting fertility. So I'm not saying that birth control is not a significant problem. I'm not saying that the individual choices that people are making with respect to they're getting pregnant, they're just either aborting their children or whatnot. Like I recognize that as a major
or they're
issue.
taking measures not to get pregnant.
Yes, but again, there is also a fertility issue. The question that is yet to be, explained when you say that you're pro-natalist is, again, you can be pro-natalist and actually believe some pretty horrible things with respect to what we should do to increase population numbers. Like, are you going to push the idea that some of the stuff that he does that almost falls into that transhumanism range? Are you pushing this idea?
Are we going to grow babies outside the womb?
Are you going to grow babies outside the womb? Like, are you when? It's one thing to be pro-natalist. It's another thing to be pro-family and pro-life, right? These are different terms, and I feel like he's used pro-natalist intentionally. It could be to avoid issues with pro-life or the family issues, because when you go down to centrist policies everywhere else,
that's the red flag for me.
Right?
That's the big red flag for me. Like the biggest problem that I see is that Elon is approaching this like a technocrat. He's approaching this almost like an engineer. I see a problem. There's a real clear fix. 2 + 2 = 4. It always equals 4. This is how we get rockets, into space. And this isn't what politics is. Politics is a lot messier than 2 + 2 = 4. You told me, it's a great analogy, and we did a whole podcast on this, I think like 2 years ago. Yuri Bezmenov gave a bunch of lectures. Soviet defector. He was never a KGB agent, but he worked for the KGB.
Yes.
And he defected to the West, and he gave a bunch of lectures in the 80s warning about active measures and ideological subversion that was taking place, much of which has come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that he said near the end of one of these lectures from 40 years ago was, he wrote up on a chalkboard and he was like, 2 + 2 = 4. It's absolute mathematical fact, no debating it. This is the truth. Mathematically, it is true. Now, how many people are willing to go up there and say 2 + 2 = 4 and shoot me for it?
Yeah, I will die.
I'm willing to die for
this.
it.
Yeah.
And then he wrote next to the board, he wrote Jesus Christ. And he says, meanwhile, there are millions, tens of millions potentially, who are willing to die for this. And this we can prove with all the formulas in the world, and this one we cannot prove.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least at the very least, we debate constantly about, the historical authenticity of the Gospels and Acts and all of that. The point that he was trying to get across is that something can be true, objectively, mathematically, not up for debate, but that does not inspire any sort of desire to live and die for that truth.
Yeah.
That truth can be extremely useful, and we definitely want to teach it, right? We want to teach mathematics, right?
And we want to defend it and fight for it.
But that is not the thing that motivates men to get out of bed in the morning and go into battle and die and sacrifice and toil and spill their blood and treasure and sweat to fight for. Things are much deeper than that. And politics is not about 2 + 2 = 4. Elon is approaching this, again, like a technocrat, like an engineer, this is a 2 + 2 = 4. We have a mathematical problem. We have a debt that's going to drown our country, and so therefore we need to fix that problem. I totally agree with him on that.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely agree with him on that. But I also understand from 12 years of working in politics, my entire adult life, that is not what drives politics. It's in some ways, it would make the problem easier if it did. If everybody just operated on this as just a mathematical question, we need to balance the budget, balance the books. But politics is much messier than that, because politics is ultimately about things that are much more fundamental than mathematical equations. They're about the type of things that make people fight and die for deeper causes. This is about substance, not process. And he's focused on process-oriented problems. But ultimately, you're never going to get around to fixing the process-oriented problems until you fix the substantive problems of politics. Who belongs to the polis and who doesn't? Mm-hmm. Here's a question about the immigration issue that he ran into like a brick wall in December. Should somebody like Zoran Mondami be able to come into the U.S. and get American citizenship? He's a third world Marxist, self-identified as this. This is not me calling him names.
Oh, yeah. No,
he is a Marxist. Right? Should somebody like that belong in America? let alone be elected to the highest position in terms of municipal elections in America, the largest city in America. Does he belong here? I think the question is objectively no. People like that do not belong in this country. And that is not a 2 + 2 = 4 question. That is a substantive question about what does it mean to be an American. Yeah. I do not think that being an American is compatible with Marxism at all.
Yeah.
I don't think being an American is compatible with open borders at all. I think that being an American means to be something different than the rest of the world. Now, we can debate on the margins of to what degree other people around the world might qualify to join the American family, but the emphasis is on the fact that there is an American family to join. It's not just work hard or believe in mathematical equations, right? If anybody is eligible to be an American who can do physics and can build rockets, then okay, great. You've reduced the American identity to your ability to do math. And I think it's much deeper than that. And so the problem that I see with Elon, and I'm just using one example of immigration, there's multiple examples. We talked about the natalist issue, for example, right? Elon is approaching this as a technical problem. And I think that the issue in politics is not technical. That's a sign of a deeper issue. So it's not that I disagree with him on the budget issue, but it's that you're never going to get into a position where you can deal with that until you tackle the substantive problems of politics.
The thing that I wish that Elon is looking at the problems facing the country, and to your point, and to Tina's point on this as well, like responsible spending only. Great. Define for me responsible spending. I remember this used to be something where people would say, well, Nick, are you going to do what we the people want? I'm like, we the people don't agree on what we want. This is one of the reasons why the government shouldn't try to do so many things, because the government uses force and we the people disagree quite a bit on what we want. So it's probably better left for people to figure it out among themselves through voluntary cooperation instead of the coercive power of government. But the problem is that there will be some government. There will be government spending. What constitutes responsible? Because you're going to get very, very different answers from your representatives and your constituents on what that represents. If the people wanted politicians who were willing to drastically reduce the debt and only do, quote, responsible spending, we would have gotten it by now. Thomas Sowell said this best. He goes, the reason why so many politicians are such shameless liars is not just a reflection on them, it's a reflection on us. Because when the electorate demands the impossible, only liars will suffice. And again, this is something where I'm not telling Elon, don't do what you want to do, but I'm also saying, here's the problem. You are looking at the fiscal problem. You are not looking at the political problem. Let me go ahead and describe. This is something, too, that I didn't just learn in politics. I learned in special forces. I learned by going into environments where you had to find similar objectives and for sometimes very, very different reasons. And then you had to form coalitions in order to try to achieve them. It was incredibly difficult and everything could change in a moment. But I want to point something out. If reduced debt and responsible spending only is your primary obligation, I got news for you. You're going to have a really hard time doing that because you're going to have to take things away from a lot of people. Now, you're right. Let me just say this right off the bat. Elon is correct. If we don't start reducing this spending, the people who think they're going to have something taken away right now, they're still going to lose it. It's just when they lose it in the future, it's going to be far more devastating than if we just gradually recognize that the government shouldn't have been doing these things in the first place. So I agree. But the problem is that there's a lot of people that have been taught through the education system, through popular media, through everything else that no, you can have everything. We just need to tax that person more, whoever that person is. Again, I will go back to the modernized military. Nobody is jumping out of bed and running to the polls because that's the biggest issue that's facing their lives right now. Even when you talk about things that we generally agree with, like free speech.
In fact, most people are actually wary of the idea of AI robots having military capabilities.
Yeah, like Skynet is probably not a great thing to run
Most people
on.
are kind of terrified of the idea of robots taking us over because...
So let's look at this. Elon, when you say reduce debt, responsible spending only, who are you appealing to? You're generally appealing to conservatives and Republicans. Now, you can argue all day long the Republican Party has done a horrible job on this. Fine, we can explain why that is. But you're not appealing to anyone on the left. There is nobody in the Democratic Party right now that when you say we need to reduce the debt and responsible spending only is like, ooh, goody, I can't wait to vote for the America Party. That's not happening. Modernize military with AI robotics.
You've already touched on that.
Okay, we've already touched on it. Very small people. Pro tech, accelerate, win to AI. That is your tech
Same
bros.
issue.
That is your tech bros. They're the ones like, oh yeah, AI, everything. I'm sorry, the number of people in the electorate whose pressing issue right now is win the AI fight is minuscule. Less regulation across the board. Conservatives. That's the only people that want that. The left will hate you for it. Free speech. Conservatives, right? The left is not big on free speech. Pro-natalist. Until you actually define what that means and how you plan to achieve it, I don't even know that you get anybody.
But the biggest red flag that we hinted at
Biggest red
earlier,
flag is centrist
on everything
policies
else.
everywhere. Okay, great. So centrist policies everywhere else. So guns. You're going to take my guns? You're going to do more gun control? What are you going to do on that one? Because I'll tell you what, if you're centrist on gun control, here's who you get. Nobody. You get nobody. Right? Because even though you think, well, some people just want more common sense gun control. The left hears that as you don't want to go far enough. The right hears it as you're coming after my guns. Why? Because that's always been the dynamic. Things always move in the direction of actual registration and confiscation, or it moves in the direction of you're going to just leave my guns alone. And you're not going to show me the centrist policy that gets anyone out of bed to vote for you.
Well,
are you going to do a centrist policy on abortion? Show me anybody that's going to vote for you on that.
What about immigration?
Yeah, show me your centrist policy on immigration.
Well, there is a center, like the same lady I was talking to at the polls who was saying, don't touch this funding, was like, how come we can't just have an in-between party? She even said, like, I think, aren't most people, almost everybody's in the middle anyway. And I said, actually, no, it's about 15% of people that are in the middle. And I said, and they don't have any steam to do anything. In fact, that 15% that's right there in the middle swings back and forth and decides our elections for us every single time. So I'm like, you'll have 15% of people, and that's it.
Well, and can we just say that, and this is the part where I'm going to make people mad, and this is going to be a test. Because I'm going to make a general statement. A general statement means it's generally true. It doesn't mean it's absolutely true in the sense that anybody identifies this way automatically falls into this category. It means, generally speaking, based off of my experience, this is what I found. The people that usually identify themselves as being the most moderate or the most, quote, independent are usually the least involved and the least informed about politics.
Yep.
I'm sorry, that's true. Most of the people that are like, well, I'm an undecided voter. They're undecided a week before the election when you have two candidates that could not be more different from one another. And they're acting like there's some real major issue that they're, and here's what I want to just put out here. There's a social reason for this. If you're not very engaged in politics, right? If you don't really care, if you're more focused on kind of what impacts your daily life, your job, your career, your school, your family, whatever it is, and you're not really digging into the Austrian School of Economics versus the Keynesian approach to this, if you're not really digging into, well, I don't know, what sort of rescission bill might the Senate consider for this process, you're not paying attention to any of that. You probably couldn't have explained the process for how a bill becomes a law. You are motivated by what happens to convince you at any particular election point, by whatever the top issue is. And being an independent or an undecided puts you in a position where you can either avoid conflict, which again, if this is not that important to you, avoiding conflict is probably your most important issue. It's avoiding social conflict within your circle. I just want to get along with everybody because I don't really care, right? You're either doing that, or it gives you this sense of moral superiority that, well, I don't belong to that camp, or I don't belong to that camp. I choose based off of, oh, okay, but then when you dig in a little, okay, so you choose based off of the individual. So what do you think about their policy on this? Oh, I don't really know. I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation where people say, well, I choose based off of the individual. And then you ask them about their platforms. Well, great. Then you must know in great detail the platforms of the two individuals running for office and can now articulate why it is that a particular platform. Here's what you end up figuring out. Vibes. They vote on vibes. Their social circle seems to prefer this group. They want to fit in with their social circle. That's how they vote. I'm sorry, that's been my experience. If you want to suggest to me that you're the person that, is the exception to the rule, fine.
There's
still
they'll
a rule.
make themselves feel better by saying they're all the same anyway.
Yeah, there's a bigger issue at play here on the whole being centrist and everything else. Centrism is how we got to this point.
Yes.
Elon's two biggest things that he complains about, one of which he's declared victory on, and I think very prematurely, is wokeism and spending.
Yeah.
He's declared victory over the woke mind virus. I think that is a huge mistake to say that you've won the fight on that. Does anybody honestly believe that wokeism will not come roaring back the second that a Democrat wins a presidential election or wins control over Congress? Like, it is not dead at all. It's dormant because they lost an election. You honestly think that they're going to put the trans pride progress flags away the second that they get back into the White House? No, they're going to be flying it just like they did under Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And so declaring victory on that, I think, is a huge mistake. And then the other issue, which we've talked at length about, which is the fiscal situation. Well, who do you think gave us wokeism and exploding federal deficits?
Yep.
I'll tell you this. It was not conservatives that gave us that. It was enlightened centrists.
Oh, yeah.
In both the Democrat and Republican parties.
I will tell you, I would say 10 years in the legislature. 10 years in a legislature. You want to know who voted for the budget every single time, no matter how bloated it was? Centrists. It's like you're going to build a party off of the very people that have gone along with the spending and actually encouraged it forever. Why? It wasn't because they agreed with all the spending, but they wanted this spending. Well, how do I get you to vote for the spending I want? Easy. I vote for the spending you want. That's the compromise every single time.
Yep.
If you are the guy that says, I don't want the spending, and you say, no, I don't want any spending, not only do you not get votes on spending bills, you don't get you're not convincing someone that desperately wants spending. You should vote no on spending because I voted no on spending, right? They just look at it as fine. I'll take more of the money home to my district. You're a moron. But then they don't vote against your other bills. Why? Because the spending is what they really wanted. Because it's the easiest thing to go back to your constituents and say, look at all the money I got you.
And it's those same people that gave us wokeism because of their cowardice.
Yes.
Their moral cowardice. These people only care about bringing home the bacon. They don't want to get into messy debates over transgenderism and feminism. And
every time.
And
it is always the people that claim to be fiscal conservatives that never do anything fiscally conservative. Because and here's what they always do. They always sit there in the meetings and they talk about, well, we need to stop focusing on these cultural issues. We just need to focus on but then here's what they do. When it comes to actually cutting taxes or cutting spending, right? They always shift to, well, we need responsible management of the government. Well, wouldn't you know it? Responsible management of the government means never cutting taxes, because that would mean cutting spending, and cutting spending would be making somebody mad. And so the centrists and the moderates and all of these people that they don't want to focus on the cultural, the people that always fought the hardest on the spending cuts and the tax cuts, in my experience, were the people that were heavily pro-life, heavily pro-gun, why? Because they had a coherent political philosophy that was rooted in this idea that government shouldn't be doing these things.
It's that difference between substance and process that I was bringing up earlier. The ones that are actually fighting for these things are the ones that believe in substance, not merely process. It's the fiscal conservatives, the enlightened centrists, that only believe in the process. Yeah. Right? Oh, we can't do this because we'll blow a hole in the budget. Oh, let's not talk about this messy cultural issue. That'll alienate the moderates that determine the election. And so what inevitably happens is that these people fight for nothing. They'll die for nothing. They'll stand for nothing. And you know what? The left, they will fight for something. Yeah. They will stand for something. And so over time, the country inevitably just pulls further and further and further to the left. And the reason it has done so is not because of principled conservatives standing up and being like, no, we shouldn't be doing this insanity stuff. What are you talking about, transgenderism? Mm-hmm. BLM riots, open borders, like all of these things have been achieved because enlightened centrists have betrayed us over and over and over again because they refuse to stand up for these things because they're messy, because they're substantive, because you might alienate somebody. All the other enlightened centrists in the electorate, well, I don't want to alienate all the moderates. I've got news for you. The whole reason that we went through the nightmare of 2020 to 2024, the last 4 years of unfettered wokeism, and blowing out fiscal budgets at the same time, both of those two things that Elon apparently complains about, is because we had 40 years of enlightened centrists who didn't believe in anything other than just the process of tabling every amendment and killing every single bill and never actually fighting for anything. That's the whole reason that we're in this mess to begin with. And now you want to start a political party dedicated to pandering to these people.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of questions here that we need to get to. One is from Jacob. Jacob said, could you steel man the centrist? Okay, I will do my best, but just keep in mind, this is the argument for the centrist is the idea that government within a representative system is about compromise. And so therefore, if you take, we'll say, more of a Burkean view of society, which is to say that trying to push too hard in one direction or the other when it's not reflected in the electorate creates chaos and division. And so therefore, taking more of a centrist approach where you're constantly trying to come up with some sort of workable compromise will theoretically get you to a point where the laws are a better reflection of what the electorate actually wants. That's the steelman argument for centrism. The problem is that when you have parties that are actually moving off of things like the dialectic and applying it in such a way to where, okay, here's one extreme, here's another extreme, you find a compromise in the middle. Well, the left constantly uses that compromise as the new right-wing position. And so what you do is you get this subtle shift over time constantly to the left. So centrism doesn't really work in an environment unless you have such an underlying commitment. You have such a deep abiding underlying commitment to certain things, certain fundamental principles about what government should do, right? Then you could theoretically get away with some sort of centrism. The problem right now is that we have diametrically opposed views about who we are, what our founding represents, who we want to be as a country, and the center isn't winning this debate.
Well, the other thing I want to point out is that the center, just by nature of the center, tends to be, as you were saying before, tends to be the most uninformed. Well, the reason people fall in the center is because they feel that a hard black and white view of things is things aren't black and white. Things are kind of gray, right? And so the whole point of being a centrist is that you're not taking a hard position one way or the other. You're taking a soft position somewhere in the middle. The problem with that is that means you are a segment of the population who does not have principle on certain areas. Your principle is being in the center. There is no, I believe strongly on the sanctity of human life. No, you can't. You can't because you're in the center. I believe strongly in a woman's right to kill her children in the womb. You can't because you're in the center. You have to be in the center. And so you don't have a strong moral compass drawing you to your conclusions. You're only focused on being in the middle.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's
and so when you have a segment of the population that just kind of is like meh on everything, you don't come to a good conclusion. You've got three ways of thinking now. It's not left, right, and somewhere in between. It is the center is its own completely other thing now.
Well, this goes to the point, right? There's a difference between being what we're calling kind of a centrist for the purpose of the conversation here and believing in nuance. Right. So, for instance, I can be, I am very, very pro-life. I'm very, very pro-gun. I can also believe that there's, intelligent and strategic ways in order to achieve certain objectives. And then there's, maybe stupid ways to achieve certain objectives, right? Like I can be generally against getting the United States involved in foreign conflicts, while at the same time understanding that applying U.S. military power in certain situations is necessary and appropriate.
Well, that's all strategy.
Okay, That's the point I'm
Right.
making, right? Is that there's a difference between being nuanced. I'm not suggesting that you have to be, hardcore on the application of every single thing. This is one of the issues that people get mad at, like Thomas Massey about. It's like he's principled, but he can't get anything done. And now the question I would have though is, okay, do you disagree with what Massey's saying, or do you disagree with the approach that he's taking? And so I think that's an important distinction here when we look at this, is that if you are if to Tina's point, if being a centrist is the core philosophy of your political worldview, then what that really means is you stand for nothing. And as the Overton window shifts left or right, so too will your centrism. And that's what we've seen. Right now, if you're someone that says, no, I have certain core fundamental beliefs, but I also understand nuance when it comes to the application or being open to new evidence as it informs the way I think about various things. That's very, very different. That's very different. So we should make that distinction. The other question that we got here was, are we already, this is come from Rented Mule, question, are we already in mob rule? So when we talk about things like anacyclosis and like the degraded form of representative government is mob rule, have we essentially already reached that point where, yeah, we're in mob rule? We may call it democracy at this point, or we may call it representative government at this point. But the reason why we're not able to achieve the necessary changes that Elon Musk is talking about is because we're essentially, the majority rules and the majority wants this stuff.
I'd say that fiscally, yeah, we're definitely a mob rule. I mean, that's the one thing on Elon's point that I strongly agree with him on, is that we're heading to bankruptcy. What I disagree with him on is he still thinks that there's a technical fix, that you just need to start a new party that's dedicated to austerity, and that is not going to work precisely because we're in mob rule on the fiscal front. The voting public is not going to vote to cut government subsidies and government spending on themselves. That's just, we are not there yet. He wants a Javier Milei, and the only way that you get Javier Milei is if you get Argentina first.
Yeah.
And we are not yet in Argentina. For all of the long-term problems that are now piling up at our front door, we have not yet arrived at a situation similar to Argentina right before Milei won in 2023. We do not have, 1,000% inflation. We don't have 30 to 40% poverty rate. Yeah. We don't have effectively a failed state is where Argentina was at before Milei won.
Well, I think the other thing that we need to associate with that is, like, to this point, I will have Republicans that will fight tooth and nail for, I paid into Social Security, I am getting my Social Security. And I will sit there, I'm like, look, I'm not saying you didn't pay into it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't feel entitled to getting a benefit that you were promised throughout your entire life and were forced to pay into. I am saying that Social Security is an unsustainable model, and that what we're essentially doing at this point is punishing younger generations to sustain a program which can't last. The perverse incentives are too great. It operates like a Ponzi scheme, and there's other ways to do this better. And the response I will get back, look dead in the eyes, is nobody's touching my Social Security. Okay, at that point, if I can lay out sufficient evidence to explain why a program is bad, why it should have never been done in the first place, while at the same time acknowledging why you're frustrated about it, and even potentially presenting a path for how we could offload ourselves from it so that we wouldn't have to deal with this in the future, and so your grandchildren wouldn't have to deal with it in the future, and you're still not willing to touch it, that is a degree of ideological capture for a particular benefit or program which is so complete that it has to work itself out through devastation before people realize, oh, yeah, that's right. Just because the government promises it to you doesn't mean they have the ability to materialize the physical wealth to make it a reality. This is the part that some people do not understand. Well, if the government says, well, then they're obligated to provide it. Like, okay, they may be legally obligated to provide it, but that doesn't mean they can bend the realms of reality to actually make it a possibility. And it is amazing to me.
Oh, they'll provide it. They'll print the money to give you the checks.
Here you go. There's the $2,000 check. Well, this doesn't buy anything.
I hear people.
I'm not obligated to give you $2,000 that will buy anything. I'm obligated to give you pictures of little dead presidents printed on this paper in a green color.
I brought up earlier in this podcast that, like, the Social Security trust fund is going to run out in the 2030s. people have this idea that means that Social Security, and I might have even said either on this podcast or in previous ones, like Social Security is going to go bankrupt. That's technically incorrect.
Yeah.
So if I've ever said that, feel free to call me out for it, because that's actually incorrect. What's going to happen is Social Security will never stop sending out the checks unless Congress eliminates or cuts the program or reforms it in some way. Barring an act of Congress, they will never stop cutting the checks.
Yeah.
The only thing that will happen is that the checks will just be worth less and less and less and less, because the government will run a larger and larger and larger fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP. And as the rest of the world stops buying fewer federal bonds,
Yep.
the debt will be internalized within the US. And then you get an Argentina situation where the inflation rate is not 1-to-1 correlated, but strongly correlated to whatever the deficit is the increase in the money supply, which then correlates to the increase in inflation. And so in a country like ours, that's a fully developed economy, what will happen is that, the federal budget deficit is 8-9% of GDP per year. Inflation's 8-9% of GDP per year in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah.
We went through 8 or 9% inflation in 2021, and everybody was upset about that. Imagine that year
Just a regular
after
thing.
year after year
Getting
after
steadily
year.
worse.
And it'll get worse. It won't be 8 or 9%. The next year it'll be 10. Then it'll be 11. Then
and
it'll
the
be 12.
And it's a growth thing, so it's year over year.
Yes.
So when you think about inflation, you can't go, it's this percent inflation and that's that.
Yeah.
It's,
there's
no. It gets inflated to this,
It's
and then the
exponential.
next year it's inflated more on top of it at that same rate. So it's the rate of inflation,
It's the
not overall
It's
inflation.
the exponential.
why is this? Yes, it's exponential. Again, what that means is if inflation's down, why are things still expensive? Well, because inflation didn't reverse. It just inflated at a slower rate than it previously was.
But we're going to eventually get into a point where the inflation rate's just going to keep. That's the Argentina scenario.
Yeah.
And last thing I'll say on this, because then we want to get to what happens next. The last point on this is there's actually a really interesting paper that was published by the Federal Reserve itself in 2023 outlining basically what's going to happen on this front. And barring some technical legalistic changes,
Yeah.
the number that they gave was, unless the Federal Reserve tries to offload the inflation crisis on like the banking system, which would blow up the banking system, you might actually get, in the worst case scenario, 41% inflation is the mathematical formula that they came up with. So that might be a whole discussion for another podcast at another point in time if we do an econ related.
Yeah, well, let's go into the so
what do we think's going to happen?
Yeah, so obviously Elon's going forward with this, and he's got the money, the influence, and the platform in order to make it a legitimate run at it. And because he is intelligent enough to recognize that he's not going to supplant the whole system overnight, he's just going to go after strategic places. What it means is that he's going to probably pick somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 states to compete in, and in the House, again, maybe 11 to 15, probably 20 districts in order to play in. Well, again, with that sort of money, with that sort of popularity, he could definitely potentially shift it, especially if he has people defect. So if it's like, I'm a Republican now running as America Party, or I'm a Democrat now running as America Party, even though I think that's very, very unlikely to happen. So, all right. So what all does that mean?
I think one of three things is going to happen.
Because midterm season is coming.
I think one of three things is going to happen. In order of likelihood, I think the most likely thing is this all fizzles out and goes nowhere. And the whole mantra of nothing ever happens holds true in this case. Mm-hmm. This is not some pivotal moment in the history of American politics. And Elon talks a big game, but something comes along, the news cycle changes, and 6 months from now, we've all forgotten that this is even a thing. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a greater than 50% chance that that's going to happen. In large part because Elon is known to sometimes turn on a dime on some of these things. Yeah. I'm not saying it's likely, but there's always a chance that he reconciles with Trump. People have done that in the past. Steve Bannon has done that, right? Yeah. There's always a chance that Elon just finds something else, a new shiny object that he gets attracted to. Like he's the type of person that has to be active in stuff, and something else might catch his fancy. The other thing too is he might just run into headwinds and realize this is actually really difficult. Like starting a new political party from the beginning. Like he's the CEO of multiple companies, running private companies at the same time that he's trying to run a nationwide party starting from scratch and like recruit candidates and build out the infrastructure and all that stuff, like he might just decide, you know what, it's better to just work within the Republican Party and do the type of work that like Cliff Maloney does with Citizens Alliance. Like he might find himself doing something similar to that. I'm not going to discount that. There's a really good chance that's going to happen. I think the next likely thing is that he's serious and he goes through with this and it's a total failure. America Party gets, I mean, to give you an idea, it's looking like, I'm not going to play the clip, but this was a clip from CNN.
I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you
that was talking about what type of base could actually make up the America Party. Well, I'll give you a hint. In fact, actually, if we pull up Elon's Twitter page here, and you scroll down and you find the type of people that he's retweeting, and who are promoting, because a lot of his stuff is about Tesla, right? But if you find the type of people that are promoting, and then is him playing a video game. But if you scroll down and you find the type of people that are promoting the America Party that he retweets, you end up running into some interesting implications here, because the thing that holds them all together, and I know that I keep going, it'll take a while. Here's an example. This guy keeps promoting the America Party. Well, you know what's really interesting about this guy is that actually I'm not going to find it because he tweets a million times. This guy lives in India. He actually had a tweet and I called him out for it. He's like, it was some meme and it's like, which way, Western man? And it showed one side is, the dark side and it's Democrat and Republican Party logos, and the other one is the, bright and, future, and it's the America Party. And I quoted him and I'm like, Western man. And I pulled old tweets from memory. He's like, I live in India. And I'm like, great. How many? I'm sure Elon will win all of India's 0 electoral votes.
Yeah, because Elon's posts go worldwide. And so when people are voting in his poll for should he start a new party, there's nothing saying you have to be an American to vote in that poll.
Here it is. So here's the tweet. And the funny thing, what's so hilarious about this is that somebody put a note, a community note, and it actually links to my tweet.
Oh, really?
So I didn't do this. The community linked it, and I was like, it's my tweet where I pulled his screenshots where he was like, I live in India. and so like the point is, I don't know. Apparently this blew up enough that it ended up flagging him as a community note. And I'm using that as one example. There's hundreds of these accounts that are large accounts that are pushing this and hyping him up. And I don't think Elon realizes that these people that are hyping him up, they live in Ukraine because they use Starlink, so they love him there. They live in India. They love him. They love
because it's easy.
They're not Americans though. They can't vote in our elections.
Well, and it's easy to retweet. Right, it's easy to say, I support you. The question that all this comes down to your point is, so you can set all this up, but who's really backing you? Who are the people that are knock doors, donate money, run for office? Who are going to do it?
It's also not even just about who's backing you. Let's keep in mind that most of the left still thinks that Elon Musk is crazy. They're still driving around with their Teslas saying, I bought this Tesla before Elon lost his mind. And so he's not trying to scoop people from the center left over. And then, so you've got the left is so committed and loyal to the Democratic Party. He's not pulling anybody from there. He's courting that center. And I said, like, the max you're going to get from the center is about 10 to 15% of people. And then there are some people that are on the right who might have some loyalty to Elon because of their libertarian leanings and things like that. And so all he's going to do is splinter the right. He is not splintering anybody off the left.
That's why I said the second most likely thing is that he's dead serious, but it flops because Elon thinks that he has all this organic support for a new party. He ran polls. Oh, it's 80% of people say it's time for a third party. You ran a worldwide poll. You're having people in India that are voting in this poll. They can't vote they have no impact on like his biggest hypers are people like Ian Miles Cheong, who lives in Malaysia and has never been to America. And it's people like that DOGE account who live in India. Like, these people don't vote in American elections. They're not American citizens, and they're hyping up the America Party. And so in America, the people that actually would have a say in whether or not his party wins elections, here's what the data shows. this poll, this was CNN reported on this. Take that aside. Other than that, it's actually worth taking a look at. I'm not hyping up CNN here, but this poll that was run showed of people who have a favorable opinion of Elon and a negative opinion of the GOP is 4% of the electorate.
So he's getting predominantly the libertarian vote.
Maybe not even that, because the libertarians are also crazy. Big L libertarians.
No, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like I know a lot of people,
and these people are non-existent.
Yeah. Again,
I'm a social liberal and fiscal conservative. Okay, you've described 10% of the public, maybe.
Well, you've described a lot of people that, again, the problem is they will cheer you on, but they're not going to donate money. They're not going to knock doors. They're not going to do any of the things that are necessary to win, in part because you're not appealing to the things that really move the needle with voters. And again, this is not me being mean. I wish that cutting spending and drastically reducing the size of the federal government moved the needle with voters. But here's what I found in almost every single thing I've ever researched, looked at, or whatnot. It is at best third or fourth on the list of people who really care. And so, and guess what? They're all conservatives. They're all conservatives. There is one place you pull votes from, and it's from the right, center right. That's it. That's where you pull your votes from. So the worst case scenario is you get this started. You become so obsessed with it and dedicated to prove a point that you win, maybe you win one or two seats, but in reality, what probably happens is you just split the vote in critical races and you end up swinging it over to the left. And now you help usher in the worst possible spenders possible. Now, Dark Amalgamation had a question. Do you think that something like Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain organization will work better than a third party for fixing the budget problem?
Yes, it will.
Far better. Yes. If he had gone from, I don't want a third party, what I want is I want to find Republicans that really care about this, and I'm going to donate to their campaigns in primaries. And then here's what I would have personally recommended to Elon Musk, because I don't support the third party concept. I do support the idea of getting more genuinely like budget hawks, people that really want to take down the federal spending and reduce the size of the federal government, people that are like love DOGE. I would have gone through and I would have found like, okay, and I wouldn't have gone for a bunch of like the swing districts. I wouldn't have gone for swing districts. I would have gone for the deepest, reddest districts I could find with people that voted like moderate centrists. And guess what? You're going to find a ton of them. I would have gone to those deep red areas. I would have found someone that was conservative, but also like, no, I will vote to cut the spending. I will absolutely vote to do it. And I would have started getting involved in those primaries, because in a lot of those primaries, you can win it with a fraction of the cost and a really good door knocking campaign. And I wouldn't have just done it at the federal level. I would have started doing it at the state level. And
this is what a lot of the organizations that we've worked with in the past, that's their bread and butter.
Yeah.
That's what I used to professionally do that for a living, is work on those type of projects at the state level. Because when you take over the state governments, it has an impact on the federal level. Everybody thinks that Washington, D.C., like Thomas Massey, of all people, actually said that, like, I don't think this place can be saved, but I'm here just in case.
Yeah.
The states are probably what's going to save our country, not Washington, D.C. And in Elon's case, instead of a third party, what he should have set up is an organization that injects itself into Republican primaries to support a specific type of candidate that does the type of stuff that Elon wants.
Well, and here, so Whitfield brought this up too, because this question was kind of like Dark Amalgamations. He goes, would Elon have been better success if funded elections for a new focused caucus in Congress? Yes. Like, so for instance, and it's interesting to watch, right? So you have like the Freedom Caucus. The Freedom Caucus, maybe it hasn't been as influential as we would like in certain cases, but there have been other cases where they have definitely pushed the Overton window on the Republican caucus to the right. So if you wanted to say like, okay, hey, I want to start up a new like America caucus or whatever it is, right? And these are going to be the three things that we pledge to, and you would have gone around and you would have either supported members of Congress already in, that would have been a great place to start. Who are the members of Congress already in that are actually trying to do what you want? And then secondly, go find candidates in deep red districts, because once you get them elected in those deep red districts, they're really, really difficult to get rid of if they're voting the right way. But instead, what we end up doing is we focus because the Republican caucus would have focused exclusively on the swing districts, because what the Republican caucus wants is the majority, because you can't do anything unless you have the majority. So the smart play is you go look at the deep red districts where you got like a sleepy candidate that hasn't done anything, hasn't been engaged, has gotten used to running unchallenged, and then you start giving challengers. Right. And you start figuring out which race you pick somebody that they took some really bad votes. And the only reason why they've gotten away with it is because no one challenges them. And then you go after those people. That's how you upset in a year like this. Not only that, but if you had done that, you could have done it without opposing Donald Trump, because Trump probably would have been fine to have more members of Congress that were willing to cut more spending. But he's got to work with the composition of Congress that he currently has. So you could have actually done this in a way where now you don't run into this big battle where you're seen as like actually trying to take on and defeat Trump. You're actually trying to get more people that will do the things that you want as part of that coalition. So strategically, I think that would have been a far smarter way to go about doing this. But again, this is always the problem. I'm not going to say who it was, but I've had conversations with people who left the business community and went straight into politics. And they were going to come save the day because they knew how to budget. Like, sweet. Unfortunately, you know nothing about how this place actually works. And like, oh yeah, but I'm gonna reach out. I'm gonna talk to them. We're gonna find compromises. No, they don't need to compromise with you. All they need to do is wait you out. And I remember sitting with someone going, you don't have enough votes to do policy. You have enough votes to do politics. Now, the good news is if you do politics correctly, you can get the votes to do policy. But you have to recognize where you're at. And as long as the other side, because that was the whole idea, like, well, no, I'll reach across the aisle. As long as the other side thinks they can stop what you're currently trying to do and beat you in the next election, they have no incentive to work with you whatsoever. None. Right? When do they work with you? I'll tell you exactly when they work with you. When you've got majorities in both houses and you've got a couple on the other side of the aisle that are in difficult districts, and this is the way that they demonstrate that they're willing to work across the aisle. Then you can work with them. But otherwise, they will wait you out and grind you into the ground. They will make their entire campaign about thwarting you. And this is the part where I'm looking at Elon going, you have developed a platform for which you will rally almost no one who's serious. Okay, but there's one other component here that we haven't discussed about yet, and this is very important because this is what's going to determine whether or not Elon decides, okay, this was a neat concept, but it's better as maybe a caucus strategy as opposed to a third-party strategy. Because there's another group of people that absolutely love this idea and can't wait to be a part of it. And it's the Republicans who don't like Trump, whose primary job is to be political consultants. And what they're going to see right now is a guy that is willing to dump Bloomberg amounts of money into a failed project where they are going to forget getting their second home. They're going to get their third vacation home, second and third vacation home, off of telling Elon Musk, this is a wonderful idea. And everybody wants this because everybody's sick of the uniparty. And a bunch of consultants that could not care less about Elon Musk's objectives are going to pump him up to get as much money as they possibly can, building up whatever apparatus they need to justify getting a paycheck. And I promise you, I promise you that the number one beneficiary of Elon Musk's efforts here will be disaffected Republican consultants.
The political consulting complex is going to sink their teeth into the, if he goes through with it.
It's a massive grift. Like it is
the
such
actual
a
grifters.
massive grift.
And by the way, these people lose election after election after election because
and
in
they
large
don't
part,
care as long as they get the paycheck.
they don't have any substance either. For them, it's all about process, different process, right? You know, process of how to go through the motions of running and then losing an election.
I'm going to send out a bunch of glossy mailers and run it through my mail
We're going to do a
shop.
bunch of TV ads because the consultants get paid more in TV ads than if you organize door knocking. Consultants don't get paid to do door knocking.
No.
They get paid to run glossy TV ads and glossy mailers, right? And and they're not good at messaging because they have no idea what the average voter actually cares about or is in touch with. These are the same people that still think that we need to go back to the good old days of the Mitt Romney, Jeb Bush wing of the Republican Party, back when we lost election after election after election. But I mean, these guys who all live in, I'll use a more Virginia-based analogy because we live here. These are all like the Richmond Henrico guys, right? Like they're in a former Republican stronghold that is zoomed to the left, that have no idea what time it is. They're stuck in 2007 in terms of their framework for how politics is. The train is just totally passed them by. Mm-hmm. And all that they're thinking about is, how do I get a giant fat paycheck from the world's richest man? And they will come up to him and they will pitch him some brilliant slide deck about how they're going to bring back the Ross Perot coalition or something like that. And they're going to achieve nothing except deliver Congress to the Democrats and make themselves rich in the process. Yeah. And then we'll get a return to wokeism, which Elon hates, and we'll get accelerated government spending towards financial collapse, which Elon also hates. And a small cabal of people will get super rich in the process, and Elon will have achieved nothing except to make his bank account slightly smaller and brought back the nightmare of wokeism and an accelerated bankruptcy of America.
And everybody that has very recently been very supportive of Elon will basically associate him with that decline. They'll be like, at the moment where we thought we were getting something done, you stepped in to destroy it in the midterms. Because the other thing Elon will think he can do right now is, once he has it, he will think he can control it. He will think that the members that he does get elected, if that even happens, right? He will think, well, now they will answer to Elon.
No, they will answer to their
new.
Not.
They will answer to their constituents. Because here's the other thing people that typically don't understand about campaign finance reform. They think what happens is companies come in and they buy a politician. No, a politician generally thinks a certain way, votes a certain way, and then interests come in and support the people that are already voting that way. And so this idea that Elon's going to be able to just control these guys, first of all, that plays against his entire narrative. So this is one of those things where I go back to where it's like, it's not that I don't agree with some of the problems that Elon Musk has brought up. It's not that I don't think that we have massive problems with respect to what's called the uniparty. It's that the way he's organizing what he wants to set up, and the people that will flock to it, right, are not going to get him the changes that he wants. In fact, it could be the very opposite, because we have historical example after historical example of typically every time this happens, when you have a third party come in, that third party generally only polls from one side of the political spectrum.
And there's multiple examples in history. The Populist Party in the 1880s and 90s.
When the Bull Moose, when Teddy Roosevelt decided, did his one term after McKinley, then he did his full term. Then he backed William Howard Taft. He didn't think Taft was progressive enough, so he started the Bull Moose Party. He actually outperformed Taft, but it didn't matter because the Democrats all stuck together. All he did was fracture the right. And then Woodrow Wilson came in. You want to talk about one of the worst presidents of all of American history? It's arguably, in my opinion, Woodrow Wilson. Right, that's what was ushered in as a result of that. You had the same thing with the Dixiecrats in the 1960s that cost Hubert Humphrey the presidential election in 1968 against I don't think I necessarily mind that one as
Richard
much.
Nixon. But I'm just bringing up examples of third parties fracturing.
You saw this in multiple elections where, again, the third party, this mystical, 50% of the country is in the middle, never materializes in the actual election. Never. And so what it is people are listening to what people say, but then when they show up to the ballot box, they do something different. And if you're not willing to, and again, Elon, if you're not willing to take into account that data when you're making these decisions, well, then don't be surprised when the result that you wanted doesn't materialize and you get something worse. Because as we've said before, what is your base? Such a third party's base is calculated to be just 4%. That's voters who like Musk and dislike the GOP. I'm sorry, man.
And there's a lot of people that dislike the GOP. They're called Democrats.
Yes.
So he's there. 4% of the public.
Who are the Democrats that love you so much that they're going to leave the Democratic Party to vote for Elon Musk? The answer is no. It's not going to happen. At best, what you will get is libertarians who are generally willing to vote third party or vote Republican. You're going to get some disaffected Republicans that are just mad at the whole process. You might get like some Tucker Carlsons or Candace Owens of the worlds, but in the end, that is enough to swing it in favor of Democrats. It's not enough to actually achieve what you claim to want. And I'm not someone sitting here defending the Republican Party no matter what. But I think you get a better job if you actually try to work to get people within the Republican Party as part of a caucus that will stand strong for certain things. That has worked before. Not to the degree we would have liked, but it has worked before. Whitfield, question, what are the similarities to the attempt to bringing back of the Whig Party in the 1800s? I mean, I think we can find probably more like relevant examples just with like Ross Perot and the Reform Party. That's probably the most relevant, up-to-date example is Ross Perot came in. He did the best of any third party, I think, since Bull Moose. Because Bull Moose got like 27%.
No,
of the vote.
again, like the
Dixiecrats did better?
Dixiecrats in '68 won a bunch of southern states, but
Well,
not
I think
enough
they won
to.
like 6.
They won like Georgia.
So he did the
and
best since
Alabama.
the Dixiecrats.
Yeah.
He did the best since the Dixiecrats in the Reform Party. He didn't. I don't think Perot won any states, but they threw the numbers off enough. And
No,
to give it
Perot.
to-
He won a couple of counties in places like Maine, but
Well,
he
people
didn't win any
forget
states.
Perot tried to win again. Perot tried to run again when it was Bob Dole versus.
And he did much worse.
He did much worse. But if you look at the numbers by which Clinton won by, it's you could still make an argument that he potentially. Now I think Clinton probably won that one without Perot's.
Yeah, George
involvement.
Wallace got 13% in 1968,
Yeah.
which is actually lower than Perot in 1992, but George Wallace's support was almost entirely in the South, and so
Yeah.
he won Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia.
Yeah.
So the Deep South, basically.
Yeah, Rented Mules said, question, will Elon succeed in adding America Party to any county voting ballot for primaries? That's going to be based off of individual states. So some states make it easier for third parties to get on the ballot. Some states make it more difficult. In Virginia, if you're running, I'm assuming that Elon is focusing primarily on the federal level. He hasn't given any indication about state level offices. If you want to run for office in Virginia and you want to get on as part of a party, right? The party's got to be recognized and you got to get enough signatures to get on there.
Yeah, like the Constitution Party has been trying for eons
Yeah.
to get on the ballot and to be to get some kind of legitimate recognition and be
Yeah.
able to run candidates, and they can never quite get there. The requirements are pretty high.
All right. Well, hey, once again, if you enjoyed today's episode, we want to give a big shout out to the title sponsor, Ground News, for all of the access to great information and and again, not just the news, but knowing where the news comes from and not only who's telling the story, but why they're telling the story. And in fact, if you go to ground.news/MTA, you can get 40% off of that Vantage plan, which is the very plan that we use in order to research for these episodes. I'm also going to finish up this right here just by saying, look, Elon, like other third parties before him, has legitimate concerns. And there are things that need to be addressed. I just want to point out one other thing that we really haven't talked about too much here. A lot of times we get into this idea that the problem is our two-party system. And that's the reason why we have the problem with the spending. That's the reason why we have the problem with the regulations. Okay, Elon, I just got one question. Canada has a multi-party parliamentary democracy. Do they have problems with spending and regulations? Germany, multi-party parliamentary democracy. Do they have problems? What about the UK? What about France? What about Denmark? We can go on and on and on down the entire list. And here's what we're going to find out. All of the countries with multiple parties, it's not that they stop having spending problems. It's not that they stop having regulatory problems. One of the things that we need to address is that we need to do a lot of work in this country on, once again, explaining to people why the federal government was never intended to have this kind of power in the first place. And if we're not willing to do the hard educational and cultural work toward that end, then simply throwing up a third-party option to an electorate that is still addicted to the federal spending is not going to get you better results in the long term. Now, what you might be able to do right now is work within the party that actually has some people that are dedicated toward this and have been willing to take stands and have been willing to do so consistently over time. And there's a lot of work that we can do to actually get more candidates in there in order to move the needle. But if you're talking about just coming up with a third party, I would just say history's not on your side right now. And I know you're an innovator and I know you're a guy that's been able to work around things, but I'm looking at how you're setting this up right now. And the math don't math, because political math is very different from engineering math. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We found it informative. Please come back and join us next time. By the way, if you want to be a part of the pregame and postgame of this show, go to the link in the description and consider joining our broader community. A lot of exciting things going on there. A lot of behind the scenes stuff that our community gets that nobody else does. So go check that out. And once again, thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this episode. We will see you next episode.